Hi, this is Jennifer from the Urbana Champaign Crochet Coral Reef, and we are going to talk a little bit about different materials that you can experiment with using, and one of them is plastic. So I made this little piece out of one green plastic vegetable bag from the grocery store. We have heard a lot in recent years about plastics ending up in our oceans. I've recently heard that plastics are even showing up in our soil and in our actual food. So it is something that I know many of us are concerned about. And since we are working on the Crochet Coral Reef and thinking about the damage that is done to the reef because of global warming, one of the things that we can do is to think about materials that we're using when we're making our satellite reef. So this is a green again, a green grocery bag that I got when I bought some lettuce. I used to think that these bags were too big, but I was kind of drawn to the color and thought that it would make a nice little piece of coral. So this was just one single bag. So I could keep adding to this one, or I could make a bunch of small ones and kind of group them together. But today I'm going to show you how to make a piece like this and how to cut the bag so that you have one single strip. So this is a bag that I already cut. I think one of the tricky parts is that since it is so thin, it's the part that makes it easy to work with, but it's also the part that makes it difficult to work with. So it gets difficult to cut in kind of an even width. But it's nice to have just one big long piece, and then I just kind of wrapped it around my hand to roll it up in a piece that I could travel with or just keep nice and neat. And again, you could make just a small piece with just one bag, or you can either tie the pieces together, or you can just weave it in, starting over again like you would do normally with the yarn. So with the bag, I just have a clear one today, so hopefully that's showing up for you okay. We're going to start at the top, and the idea is that you're just going around the entire bag, the entire top of the bag in a spiral. So we're thinking of just spiraling down to the end of the bag. So to start, you don't want to cut down and then over, you want to cut in on an angle. So you're just going to cut and then decide how thick you want it to be. And I think like thumb width is a good width, or a little bit smaller, a little bit bigger. And you'll see that with these scissors, I'm having a little bit of trouble, and this is where it becomes tricky because the bag itself is difficult to cut because, again, it's such thin material. So I would say the worst part of working with a plastic bag is cutting it. So I just cut nice and slow. And I am not a very patient person, so if you noticed on my other one, the width on mine changes a lot based on how bored I was getting while I was cutting. But if you're maybe watching something on TV, you can sit and cut up a few bags that you can work with. I did watch, oopsie, now here I got super wide, so I will try to pay more attention. The nice part is that it's just plastic, so in the super wide part, when I go to crochet it, I can just kind of scrunch it together and it'll be fine. But it is important to kind of keep the similar width. So you can see here, I have come all the way around, and you can see where I cut into the bag on an angle here. So it's important to keep a pretty steady width because we're just going to keep spiraling down. And if I go too thick and then cut back in, it's going to kind of mess up that spiral. So if you do go thicker, just kind of stick with it until you get all the way around. You can adjust. Okay, so we're getting to the bottom here. And one of the things that you can do is just cut straight across the bottom of the bag. I don't do this until the end just because I think it holds it together better if you just leave that connected. And then you can see how much we have left here. And this does take a while. I do think it takes a little longer to crochet than it does to cut it, but I don't know, might be close. Oops. So I have many areas on my bag too where I got too thin or too thick. And again, when it gets too thick, you can scrunch it together. The tricky part when it's too thin is that you might tear it on accident while you're working with it. I didn't have that problem when I did the first one, and I had a couple of thin spots. But if that happens, you can just restart. You can either tie it again, because it won't really show that much, and or you can kind of weave it in and restart the same way that you might using the yarn. All right, and so as I'm getting to the end here, I have this one big loop, and I'm going to do the same thing where I'm just going to kind of gradually go out towards the edge. And there I have the end. So to make it easier to work with, you can just kind of wrap it around your hand. You can see that it is all one piece. Longer than I thought. All right, and there's the end. So to get started, you're going to do the same thing that you would when you are working with yarn. You're going to make a slip knot at the end. And I'm just going to put that off to the side. And here I'm just going to kind of wrap it around and make my slip knot with my hands. Another thing with the plastic is it doesn't have, it is plastic and it stretches a little bit, but it doesn't have anywhere the amount of give that the yarn would. So you just want to be careful when you are working with it, that you make sure that when you're crocheting that you're working with it nice and loose. There are different shapes of the hooks. So this is an H8 or a 5 millimeter, and it has kind of a curved head to it. I think that's easier for the plastic, but it also just might be what you're used to working with. So I'm just gonna go ahead and make a chain with the plastic. And again, because it doesn't have any give and it does get a little tricky, hopefully I'm pulling it through. And you can see with my left hand, I'm kind of holding it in the same way that I would yarn, but it also, as you're kind of gripping it, it helps kind of scrunch it together. And then as you wrap it around, it also kind of helps to scrunch that together. I'm just going to make a short little chain. And one of the things that I'm noticing is that as I'm making the chain, it looks more and more white rather than clear. And one of the things that happens with the coral reefs is they get bleached from global warming and the warmer waters. And we do want to think about including some white coral, so perhaps the clear plastic would make a nice representation of the bleached coral. So then I'm going to start going back over my chain and just doing a single crochet, and I'm just going to do a single crochet all the way along. And I do think that when you're working with the plastic, because it tends to flatten out and it doesn't hold its shape as well as, especially when you're getting started, as the yarn, that it is a little, oops, almost made a mistake there because I'm talking. It is a little trickier to see which hole you put it in. But I think once you get past that initial chain, it gets easier. And with the first piece that I made, all I did was, what I'm doing now is making a chain and single crocheting all the way through it. And then I started putting 2 in each hole to make the hyperbolic form, to make it grow pretty fast, but also to not overtax the material. So you can see how I'm just going through and making a single crochet, and it looks a little messy at first. It's not as pretty as the yarn, but I'll keep going and continuing to do the single crochet. And you can also see on the top that it starts to have that same kind of V shape, but again, with the plastic, it's just a little bit harder to see. So here it's a little bit wider. I'm finding that I'm having to scrunch it up a little bit more. And so the tricky part is that when it gets kind of thicker, is that sometimes it just makes it harder when you pull it through and keeping it under the hook. Because I find that the plastic likes to stick to itself more than the yarn does, and it sometimes is a little bit more tricky pulling it through. And then we're going to do the same thing. We're where you just do a single crochet, turn it, and then you start going right back through. And this is where I'm going to increase. So I'm going to do 1 single crochet, and then I'm going to go back into that same space. And you can see there, that's much thinner, which is probably my poor cutting skills. And then you can see I have 2 single crochets, and I'm going to move on to the next one. There's 1 single crochet. A second single crochet, and then we'll move on to the next hole. And you can see once you get past that first chain, it is much easier to find where you're going. So that's 1 single crochet, and the second single crochet. And again, you can see it's kind of flattening out, and I want to kind of bunch it up to make it easier to work with. So 2 there. And you can do any pattern you want. You don't have to do 2 in each one. You could keep going with single crochet for a while and then flare it out. Or you can try putting 3 in each. Or you could do a pattern of 1 and then 2. And you can see that with the plastic, it does get pretty open. You can see when you do the 2, which is why I kept it at 2, because you can see the spaces kind of stay there, are more obvious than when you're working with the yarn. I'm just going to put in extra, and then I can turn it over, and I see for some reason I didn't pull that tight. So I'm just going to leave that there. I could go back and undo it and go back and fix it, but I think I will just leave it as a little imperfection, or I could kind of tuck it in. But you can kind of see how it's starting to already get that wave. So I'm going to go back and do a couple more rows, and then I will show you how you can add another. You could either have 2 different colors of plastic going, but I'll show you how to keep going if you run out of plastic. All right, so I did a couple more rows. You can see that it's got a nice little shape to it already, and I am down at the very end of my plastic here. So one thing I can do is just kind of tie this off. I'm just going to pull it through both. And then I can go ahead and weave this plastic through just with my hook. When you're working with plastic, you can even experiment with purposefully leaving like the tails sticking out a little bit if you want it to have kind of like a more free-form look, or you can have it kind of tight in there. Just depends on like how you want it to look. Another thing that I could do is just go with, if I wanted to make it bigger, is to just go with another piece, and I could tie it right together. Okay, so we'll just kind of back up to here, and I'm gonna just take these two pieces and tie them together. Another way to do this would just be to weave the other piece in there. But we'll just kind of experiment with this, see how it goes. And again, like I said, you could leave these tails and just go with the tails kind of sticking out. And if you were to make a really big piece and you had these kind of extra little pieces of plastic kind of hanging from there, I think it would look cool. It would just kind of have this kind of added bit to it. So you can kind of see here, like once I keep going, you're not even going to notice that I tied a piece together there. So that's how you can make a bigger form and keep going with that. Other things that you can do with the plastic, if you don't like working with just the plastic, you could think about, I have this problem where I can't crochet and talk. Other things that you can do is you can add plastic to another piece as an edge. We talked about using different colors for an edge, but if you want to crochet in some plastic, you can do that on a finished piece. And so if you wanted to think about the bleached coral and add, work with some white yarn and then add plastic on the edge of it, that would be another way to incorporate some plastic into your work without having to go through and make a whole piece using plastic. I did choose to use a very soft plastic when I made this, and I'm using just a medium-sized crochet hook. And you know, if you have different sizes, you can play around with which size works best for you. And then you can also use, like I have a lot of just of the white grocery bags with the handles. And I would say the way to start with a bag like this would be to do the same thing that I did. And what I would do is just cut off the handles. And then if you want to keep that plastic and use it for something else, you can hang on to it. And then I would just go through the same way and I started before, which is kind of cutting in on an angle and then cutting all the way around. So if you want to use your regular grocery bags, you can do it that way. And there's I'm sure you've noticed that there's all different thicknesses of those plastics. And as much as I try to reuse my plastic bags, I know that not being able to use my reusable shopping bags, I'm getting more and more plastic bags. Like I said before, another thing that you can do is add plastic to a piece that you already made. So I have some, looks like dog fur woven into this piece, which was unintentional, but you can intentionally weave in some plastic to your piece. And again, you don't have to crochet it. You can, I could just, I pulled this little loop through and I could continue to crochet and just put an edge of plastic along this piece that I made. So I could just go ahead and incorporate the plastic that way. Another thing that you could do is play with the edge a little bit more. And instead of just having the plastic crocheted, you could just pull it through So one thing that you could do is, instead of going through and crocheting it, I could instead weave it in. So I might start in the middle somewhere, or I could start at the end. And when you're pulling it through without crocheting, you can still use your crochet hook and then just kind of hook it through and pull it. And then I could come back on the other side, wrap it around, and pull it through that way. So I could just weave it through like that. I might want to leave some hoops sticking out as I pull it through. And I could do that on both sides. I could just pull small pieces through and knot them. So I have the handles that I cut off of that other bag. And if I wanted to cut some strips, I could think about adding plastic this way as well, where I just kind of scrunch this piece up a little bit as I pull it through. And then I have that circle opening, and I could just pull these through. So I'm like making fringe almost with the plastic. And I could go all the way across, and I could vary the length of it, or I could start to pull some of it in. So you can just play around with it. It doesn't have to be just using the crochet stitches. You can kind of play around with how you're incorporating the plastic. If you want to use plastic but not go through and make an entire piece that's plastic. So hopefully that gives you some ideas to play around with, and you can try crocheting with plastic.